Good morning, good day, and good evening. I think this is episode 203, I want to say, but it is also the first episode we're recording in the year of 2024. And today we have a really interesting guest on the show. Welcome, Mathieu Comandon from the Lutris project, the founder and, I guess, biggest contributor on the project still. I don't assume anyone's contributed more to it than you have.
No, I don't think so. But yeah, I have like good contributors too. I mean, yeah.
It's grown
But yeah,
quite a bit over the years. I only heard about it maybe like 3 or so years ago, but doing my research on it, I didn't realize just how long the project had been around for.
so it's going to be this year. It's going to be 15 years old.
Wow.
Like the project. Yes, it started like in 2009. And even before that, I had like a few ideas about like running games on Linux, but not like the Lutris project. Maybe like some side ideas. But yeah, like this year is going to be 15 years old.
Jesus.
2009, like the first prototype.
Mhm.
If you look around, you may find like an old blog in French
Mhm.
where I talked like about like the first announcements for Lutris. And yeah, that was a really different world back then.
So, I'm sure most people probably know, but just for anyone who doesn't, give a brief explanation on what Lutris is and what problem it's trying to solve.
So the initial goal of Lutris was making it easy for everyone to play as many games as possible on Linux.
Mhm.
Um, so that was meaning like gathering like a whole bunch of tools, what we call runners,
Mhm.
which is like a concept that is a bit opaque for some because it refers to a collection of software that we ship
Mhm.
and that's used to run the games actually. So we have Wine, which is like the biggest one,
Mhm.
but we also have MAME, we have RetroArch, we have Dolphin, basically any, like we have GZ Doom, we have ScumVM, basically anything that can run like multiple games that will serve as the basis of a runner.
Mhm.
So, and it will handle like several uh, gaming platforms. So, for example, Wine, it will be Windows games. DOSBox will be for the MS-DOS games, and you have like those multi-platform runners too, like MAME, RetroArch.
Mhm.
But over time, I mean, Linux, like gaming on Linux, like improved quite a bit, and the goal for Lutris has kind of like evolved with that in the sense that it was less and less of a challenge to get the games running on
Mhm.
Linux. So we didn't need like as much as tinkering as we used to. So we were in a position where we got the games running on Linux and they're running like really good. And now the goal is just like keeping that around.
Mhm.
So we have like those games running, like a huge number of them, and let's make sure that they stay that way for the foreseeable future.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying like just like 2 or 3 years I can do to the future. I'm talking about like 20, 25 years. Like let's make sure that we keep like our legacy of video games playable
Mhm.
like for the foreseeable future. And yeah, that's been like um, the new priority for Lutris
Mhm.
because it was more than just like like running games on Linux. That's pretty much a solved problem. Valve has helped a lot with that. So yeah, we focus more on keeping those running and improving the situation.
There's obviously still a couple of issues, most notably with like weird anti-cheat stuff, especially when you're dealing with the like rootkit style anti-cheat that you see in a lot of Riot games, for example. Um,
Mm.
I know there was a time where a lot of people were playing League of Legends on Linux, for example, and as of late, they've started messing around with their anti-cheat system that's caused a lot of problems there. Um,
Uh, yeah, so right now you can still play League of Legends. We've had like an update recently.
oh, okay.
But yeah, that was like a few weeks ago. It was broken,
Mhm.
and then we had a fix for it, but don't hold on to it like too much,
Yeah.
because there was a live stream from Riot Games where they said they would introduce Vanguard, so that's the anti-cheat that's used for Valorant. That's coming end of February, beginning of March. And if that's the case, that means like no more League of Legends on Linux at all. Like no fix will ever like fix that. I mean, there's like no solution for like making that run. So yeah, you can just say goodbye to League of Legends. And for the longest time, League of Legends has been like the top game in Lutris, the one with the most like installs. And that's just going to go away, and that's kind of too bad. It's kind of the same for like any game that's based on a really like on a live service. It's not quite the same as with anti-cheats, because anti-cheats, I mean, the game is still maintained, you can still play it on Windows. But over time, like all those games that depend on a server,
Right.
like on some online service, once the online service becomes unavailable, whether it's like anti-cheat does not work, or the game server just plain shuts down, then you cannot preserve that video game.
Yeah.
Unless you come up with some solutions where you re-implement the backend server, which is like a lot harder. Then yeah, those games are gone. So I don't know what to make of it, because in that sense, I mean, Fortnite already like isn't. We can't preserve it. League of Legends, like you can't preserve it either if you don't like have a way to run like the backend service. So I'm not sure what to position myself with that. It's like a really tricky thing, like that. Yeah, those are online games. The good thing is that a lot of online games now work, even those using EAC or BattlEye. You have a lot of publishers that said, yeah, okay, we'll enable like the Linux bits for EAC, and now you have a bunch of games that still work. It's just that it's not the same EAC. You have like EAC that's just like the normal anti-cheats, and then you have like the EAC that's the full-blown like kernel level mode, and Vanguard like is basically the same thing as this setting for EAC. So that's, I mean, is unlikely to work ever in Linux. So yeah, I mean, there's not really a good solution unless we see some kind of like bridge, like from the Linux kernel, like to the anti-cheats. But that's kind of involved. That's not something I'm capable of doing with my skill sets.
I know there was some
yeah.
discussion or work on something similar to that being done with the Wine team. I don't know how far that moved past like the early stages, and that obviously would be a giant project to do. It would be awesome if it could happen at some point, but I wouldn't put my money on it happening. I would want the preferable solution there is Vanguard to do something similar to what was done with EAC and BattlEye, where they do offer a version that does work properly on Linux, but that still doesn't deal with the ultimate preservation issue. Like, you're still going to have this issue where if you're playing a game like Genshin Impact, for example, when the servers go down, it's all gone.
It's gone, yes. Yeah, that's kind of tricky, because do we want really games to interfere with the kernel, like to have like kernel access to your system? So that's, I mean, it's at the same time a blessing and a curse, because those games, they don't work, so that's too bad. But also we're kind of protected on Linux from those games that's kind of overreach, that's do things that maybe they shouldn't be doing. I mean, it's not really, I mean, games using like kernel level features, I mean, maybe we should find some better solutions than that. So yeah, maybe we're protected against the game itself that could be like doing like anything on your system. But also you can't play the game. But so that's, as I said, it's a blessing and a curse, because do know that most Linux users, the way like the mentality of Linux is that they wouldn't want those kernel entities running on the system. But also they power those games that are really popular. So it's a big trade-off to make. So you trade off like more security, like more like your privacy in your system, but also you don't get those popular games. It's kind of tricky. There's like no good solution. Running a VM most of the time is not a solution, because those games will also detect that you're running in a VM.
Yeah, you can, for a lot of cases, get like really hardware spoof VMs, but it's a lot more complex than just, firing up VirtualBox and just being done with it. Like, you got to really understand how a virtual machine works, what you need to configure, what little things it's going to look for that might set it off. Like, a basic thing, like if you have a CPU being reported by your VM, and that clock rate it has isn't exactly what the clock rate of that chip should be. Like, that's enough to set off some of these VM detection systems. And that's just a basic one that you can hide. It goes so much deeper than that, and it's not something the average person's ever going to be able to do. Like, they want to be able to just fire up a game, and it hopefully just works.
Yeah. I mean, like the best solution right now is just to use like some kind of streaming service.
Yeah.
I still have a subscription to GeForce Now, and that works well enough if you want to play Fortnite or Destiny 2. The Riot games are not on there, so there's no solutions really for like Valorant. Pretty much, if you want to play Valorant or League of Legends in a few months, you will have to dual boot with Windows. I mean, there's no way around that, I think. So, yeah, or find some other games to play. I don't know. I mean, never been a big fan of League of Legends, so I'm not losing anything. But yeah, I know it's really like it's hugely popular, and that's too bad. I mean, this has been like the biggest game like on Lutris for ages. I wish there were a solution. I could do like something more, but sadly, yeah, that's not the case. Or I hope that maybe Riot will push back. I mean, they've talked about like introducing Vanguard into League of Legends for years now, and they're only talking about like, doing it now. So maybe they will like postpone it, like even further, never do it. Maybe, I don't know. They do have like a Mac version of League of Legends.
Yeah, which is funny because my understanding is you can't do like Ring Zero anti-cheat on Mac.
Yeah, on Mac. So I don't know. They don't have like. There's not a whole ton of works involved to port League of Legends on Linux. If you use things like DXVK native, which will let you like not have to rewrite your entire like graphics stack, they could port it pretty easily. I mean, it wouldn't be much more effort than maintaining the Mac version. So yeah, I mean, they have the means to do that. They just don't want it. That's too bad.
Yeah, I think that's where it'll come back down to. They just don't want to do it. Obviously, I don't have numbers on this, but I can't imagine the audience on macOS is that much bigger than the audience on Linux.
I mean, if we take the numbers from Valve, like the Steam survey, the Linux users there are more Linux users than Mac, at least for video games. I know that like for like general computing usage, there's like probably more Macs.
Oh, definitely,
still.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about like gaming, Macs have been like so. It's been such a struggle to keep games running on Mac because they keep like deprecating like 32 bits, and now they're switching to whole new architecture.
Yep.
And you still have some compatibility layers and everything to get your games running, but it's a process, really. So Macs have really become like this weird platform to run games on. So I hope, like on Steam itself, that's done already. If you combine desktop Linux plus Steam Deck, we're already more than Mac users. And maybe that will I mean, maybe some publishers like Riot Games, like Epic Games, they will take that into account and say, okay, well, we have this platform that has more like potential gamers than Mac, so maybe we should support it.
Wasn't there a statement from? I think there was a statement from Epic Games. It was something like, if Linux has 300 million users, we'll support Linux, or it was some dumb number like that. Where it's just like
Oh yeah, no, but
thrown
that's
out.
also like a statement from like Tim
Yeah.
Sweeney, who
Tim Sweeney
was like,
said it a little while ago. Yeah.
yeah, it was like not really that long ago. I think it was a few weeks
Yeah.
ago, and it was saying, yeah, like a few million users, which it has already. I think it's the Steam Deck already has shipped a few million units.
Yeah. Here it is. Fortnite on Steam Deck. Tim Sweeney says Valve needs tens of millions of users to justify it.
Yeah, and I guess there's probably like it's going to get there, like tens of millions
Yeah.
of users. If it's not there already, it keeps like the Steam Deck still is on top of the on the Steam sales. You still see it on top like all the time. It doesn't drop. No, and it's keep like bringing up like the Linux stats every month. It gets like a little bit bigger.
Yeah, the Linux stats are funny because of the Steam Deck. When you look at like the hardware survey, it's not the Linux hardware survey now. It's just the Steam Deck hardware survey. Like every single
Pretty
top
much,
thing is just the Steam Deck. So I think like
pretty much,
500. Go on.
It would be like maybe better to have like a separate Steam Deck category and a Linux
probably.
one. So we would see, because right now it's like the Steam Deck kind of eclipses like the whole rest of the Linux desktop. I mean, which is not really a bad thing.
No, it's not. It just makes the numbers
like
kind of weird.
It makes like a Linux a really successful platform.
I'm
not against it.
Because I think, I think if you go to like the specific Linux section, it says like 256 gig hard drives are now like the biggest hard drives on Linux, which is entirely because of the original model Steam Deck, which is the one that most people were buying, the mid-tier one. You said it's not a bad thing. It just makes the numbers it makes the numbers really weird and sort of not as meaningful as they used to be. But if you really care about Steam hardware server anyway.
Yeah, I mean, those like have some limited value. They still are useful. They are not to be treated as like the ultimate truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it gives like a general like, understanding where like Linux gaming is headed to, and it's like a nice way to have a look at the trends and everything like that. So it's still useful. I don't see it as like some people, they will go crazy when they have like a Steam survey on the desktop, and they're like, oh yeah, I got the Steam survey. Oh, I mean, yeah, it's kind of random. It doesn't like mean much. But yeah, it's still some valuable, because it's one of those few sources that we have to compare like ourselves to like the Windows gamer mass or the Mac gamers.
And now that it's closing in on 2%, like early on, you saw the numbers just weirdly change. Like when you have less than, I remember when it was less than 1%, like the numbers would just jump up and down every single month. It wasn't really indicating it that well, just because the user base was so small that any tiny amount of extra Linux users who got the survey really heavily influenced what was going to happen. Now that we're like closing in on 2%, like the numbers are a lot more, they're growing, but they're a lot more stable than they were before.
Yeah, because when it was only desktop Linux, I think one of the things that would influence like the numbers was like during the summer, there would be like more people like on vacation and more like people like using Linux. So you would see like the numbers going up. And then in September, you would see like the numbers going back down. And it was like doing the same thing like every year. I don't know if we're going to see that anymore because of the Steam Deck and people have just this device that's running Linux constantly. but now I'm not like, yeah, I'm still hopeful that's with that video game aspect like kind of solved. Like we have like a major part of the gaming ecosystem that's pretty much a solved problem.
Mhm.
I'm hoping that will help seeing like the numbers in like Linux desktop, the regular one, like not Steam Deck,
Mhm.
go up as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's something I'm hopeful in the future.
Yeah, I'm definitely hopeful for that as well. Um, actually get back to the main reason I brought you here, the Lutris stuff, not just general Linux stuff. So most people when they start one of these like gaming projects, they have a
Mm.
specific game in mind that they are trying to play. Did you have a specific game at the time that was like, this is the reason why I'm going to start this project, or was it just like, I generally want to make gaming better in this space?
Well, yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
So I had something in mind. So let's think that it was like 15 years ago or
Yeah, yeah.
more. That was even before Lutris existed.
Mm-hmm.
But I was tinkering with like getting games to run on Linux, and one of the big games at the time was the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion.
Mm-hmm.
And like my first UI I wrote in Python was this kind of like mini configuration tool for launching Oblivion on Linux that would like apply some settings, that would apply some command line arguments, that will, I think it was replacing a texture somewhere to fix a bug. So that was like really simple, really basic. You had like a button, like 3 buttons in a window or something. And in some way, that was kind of what got it started. But also, so at the time there was this, Play on Linux was already there.
But by about
But Play
two
on Linux
years.
was, huh?
I,
Yeah, 15 years ago, yeah, it was already an
no, no,
established
that's
like
what I'm saying.
soft.
I Play on Linux was out for about 2 years by the time that Lutris came out.
I'm not exactly sure when Play on Linux came out, but yeah, it was here like
I
a
want to
few
say it was
years before.
2007.
Yeah, that might be yeah. So that would be like 2 years. Um, and the thing it was like heavily focused on Windows games,
Mm-hmm.
and one big issue I had was like not only with Windows games, because at the time we were like one Wine wasn't as good at it as it is now,
Mm-hmm.
and Linux native games weren't as bad as they are now. So they were
Okay.
better. Like because a lot of the Linux native games, they come out, they run great, and over time they kind of break
Yeah.
themselves. Like compatibility becomes worse and worse, and it becomes harder to keep those games running.
Mm-hmm.
So all the games you had at the time, they were working great, and now those games they're like kind of hard to get working.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of hopes regarding native games and also like open source games that were like pretty much like one of your only options when running Linux, is you had to use a lot of those open source games. So Open Arena, Xonotic, all those games, we wanted to make them like give them more exposure.
My
So that's
personal
why I
favorite,
wanted.
Super Tux Kart.
Yeah, Super Dark Scout is one of them, like one of the big ones. And I didn't want to focus only on Windows games for that reason. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted like to be like open to native games, to Windows games, and why not add in the bunch also all the emulators so
Mm-hmm.
that we would have like pretty much any game playable. That was basically spending a lot of time like tinkering on Linux, getting emulators to work, like configuring them and trying to find the best settings. And I was like, okay, well, this involves like reading a lot of tutorials. This involves a lot of tinkering. Some emulators, you can install them with your package manager. Some you cannot. You have to download them. You have to compile them. So why not make like some kind of unified platform where you can play pretty much anything? So that's what like the basis of Lutris was always to be able to play everything from Windows games, from Amiga games, DOS games, and Linux games, of course.
Mhm.
So yeah, it started like with like that one game, Oblivion, but the goal of the project was always like a multitude of games.
So it's sort of to be like a unified platform where everything can be done from this one place, which is especially a big deal now with all of these different launchers that exist. Like, you know, you have your Steam launcher, Epic Games launcher, GOG's got a launcher. Like, everybody's got a launcher. But with this, you can just be like, okay, I want to play this game. You go to the game. It'll do it'll open up the launcher and whatever stuff it needs to do, but you have this single access point to get all of that content you want to get to.
Yeah, which is kind of like this unique stuff. I mean, you have stuff like that's similar with a Heroic launcher as well, but to a lesser extent because there are not as many integrations. You have something similar in GOG for Windows. I mean, like GOG Galaxy has never been released to on Linux, but there are some integrations which are the basis for the Lutris integrations. We do use those. I mean, they're written in Python as well, so they are a good inspiration for like writing the Lutris ones. But yeah, that's really neat feature to have like all the launchers like grouped together. But also, it's like no, it doesn't matter if it's Windows or Linux or anything. It can be like a PlayStation 3 game. It can be like a Nintendo Switch. It can be like Super Nintendo. It doesn't matter anymore. So yeah, that's also like abstracting the game platform and only caring about what game you want to play. That was like one of the goals.
So I don't know if you've read the Wikipedia page for Lutris. I don't know if you ever feel like doing that. But on the page, it says Lutris began as a piece of software called Oblivion Launcher. Citation needed. Is that true? Can you give them a citation?
Yeah, that was what I was talking about. Like previously, it was so you may be able to find it in the Ubuntu French forums back then. I made a post. I probably can find the source code for that Oblivion launcher if I look into my hard drives. But yeah, that's perfectly true. That's like what was like the basis of like the first Python code. That I mean, none of that code made it through like the actual Lutris.
Right.
The actual basis for the Lutris project was a framework called Quickly. That was created by a French Ubuntu developer called Didier Roche. And that was basically a way to scaffold your application so that you had like the whole like UI already built. You had like a window already made for you. You had like the Launchpad integration. So people don't really use Launchpad now, but it was like the equivalent to GitHub. So in one command, you could just build your application into a package and push it to Launchpad. So it would be like you could make a deb file out of your software with one line. So that was like really convenient to get started on Lutris. I just had like to build the code inside the application, but all the scaffold was already done. So that was pretty cool.
So I'm sure, like, especially back in those early days, now not so much. You were probably asked a lot, like, why didn't you just go and work on Play on Linux, or why are you making your own thing when Play on Linux is around, or anything like that. Like, so
yeah,
why not get it? Why
there's
didn't you
several
get involved with
reasons.
it back then?
I considered like contributing to Play on Linux for for a moment. I did, and the reasons why I didn't follow through that is that first Play on Linux is geared toward Windows games only. I mean, at least it was the case back then. Now I know that they also have support for DOS games and ScumVM games. But it was really important for me at the time that we also supported like native games and also emulators and all that stuff. The second aspect was that we were like Play on Linux was using the WX widgets toolkits,
Mm-hmm.
which I didn't really know about. Didn't really want to get into it. And also it worked by doing like a combination of Python and Bash, where like every on Linux window would be its own Python program, and you would have like Bash scripts linking those together. And I was
Okay.
like, that's a kind of weird way to do things.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not sure if I'm sold on this like kind of architecture. So I'd rather like, do something like on my own that's like not linked to and you know it's open source. So if anything, if there's anything in Play on Linux that I need, I'll just go and read the source code for Play on Linux, and I'll kind of do my own thing based on it, which has very rarely happened, to be honest. I mean, I don't think that I've ever read like the source code for Play on Linux to write some Lutris features. I've done that like with Heroic. That has happened like for like getting Proton back. But yeah, I've read like some parts of the Play on Linux source code, but wasn't like. I mean, sometimes it was useful, but never like to port some features.
Right.
Like, yeah, I would say like the GOG Galaxy integrations were much more useful, but that was many years later.
Play on Linux nowadays is a lot less. It gets a lot less attention. I know that it still is being worked on, just at a much slower rate. But I'm sure you also get a lot of comparisons with the Bottles project as well.
I mean, Bottles came later.
Yeah, no, it's fairly recent, but like
Yeah.
nowadays, I'm sure you get comparisons with Bottles.
I'm very glad about that Bottles. I mean, we have like we're pretty close. Like I have a pretty close relationship with like the Bottles developers. I've noticed also I've read some of the Bottles source code, and I was like, oh wait, I wrote that. That's some code that's from Lutris. So I was like, okay, that's cool. Yeah, it's always cool to have like some open source project that's kind of like reuses some idea and not like does things like from scratch. And in a way, Bottles is the software that a lot of people have asked me to write,
Right.
and I didn't want to write. So Bottles is like wine only, and it's like kind of this. I mean, people have always been asking for a wine prefix manager. And it was never clear to me like what that meant, because I mean you can like manage your wine prefixes with Lutris, but it's not like the forefront. It's like not the main goal of Lutris is not to tinker with your wine prefixes to get the game running as fast as possible and keep it that way and not have to go into the settings at all. So Bottles take this kind of different approach, which I'm very glad they did, so that if someone tells me, oh, can you write a wine prefix manager, I just tell them, no, just use Bottles. It's here for that. So yeah, I'm pretty glad that I can just redirect people to that software instead of having to maybe have to write some new stuff that I wouldn't want to.
So what were they meaning by wine prefix manager then? Like what would that actually entail?
I'm not sure at all. I mean, maybe a way to create wine prefixes without the concept of a game, like having a little button with like create prefix in some location, like, and then you add your game inside. I mean, like there's a lot of options in Bottles. I mean, a lot of things that Lutris can't do. So I'm guessing that's all of this. But managing a prefix is like a pretty broad term. So it's not really. I'm not really sure myself what they mean by that. I've always had like enough functionality in Lutris to do whatever I needed to do in with wine prefixes.
Well, one thing you touched on earlier was native games. So that obviously had a lot, like especially a couple of years after that. Then you had the original version of SteamOS, and that was a a big shift in what Valve was doing. Because if I remember from the time, that was when Windows was first coming out with the like their Windows Store, and I know that Valve was fairly worried about what was going to happen, whether the platform was going to become similar to what macOS is, where yes, you can download things from the web, but most people don't. They all download it from this store, so they weren't really sure like what was going to happen, and sort of use Linux to hedge their bets. So when SteamOS came along, what were your initial thoughts about it? Did you think that they were going about it in a... Did you think that native gaming was actually going to become a widespread thing, or did you hope maybe they did something different?
I mean, now I sure did. I sure hope they did something different.
Yeah.
Like now, yes, but at the time, I was really excited about like SteamOS and like all those Linux native games that we would see. But that quickly became a bit sour because we noticed that all those Linux ports we were getting often had a lot of issues, and they often had like a big performance hit. It was not uncommon to have like a 30% less performance on Linux than on Windows, because those games were like doing like, they had translation layer that did basically what DXVK does, but in a much less efficient way. So yeah, that was the case like for Feral Interactive games, like all games like Borderlands. I think Borderlands had a pretty big performance hit. Tomb Raider also was not as good, and it became like kind of better. The ports released by Virtual Programming, so that was like so one that made people upset, was it was not native enough. It was like too much of an abstraction layer. So the people were upset about The Witcher 2, which on top of that, when it released, The Witcher 2 was a big mess because Virtual Programming were still experimenting with their, I think it was called Eon. So Eon was their like product used to basically wrap a Windows game into a native Linux executable. And for a lot of people, that was not good enough. It was not native enough. Mostly because it didn't work very well. I mean, I'm sure that if they had pushed Witcher 2 in a playable state from like the launch day, I'm pretty sure like people wouldn't have complained as much as they did about Eon. Because they did release some titles like Dirt Showdown. Dirt Showdown was pretty good. I mean, it had like a really good performance. And I remember seeing some benchmarks where the Eon version from Virtual Programming would run better on Linux than the Windows native version did. Maybe with some very special circumstance with like Bioshock Infinite or something like that. But yeah, it was still like hacky. It was still, I mean, in some way, it was not nearly as good. And now you have all those native ports like today, they're still around. You can still like download most of them on Steam. But in most cases, we'll just have like less problems just downloading the wine version and running it with Proton. So, and you have like on GOG, for example, if you GOG won't sell you like the native ports, so you'll have like just one option. You'll have like the Windows version, which is like not a bad thing, to be honest, because the Windows version will work with DXVK, whereas like the Linux ports like might run or might not run. I mean, it depends on how lucky you are with how the game has aged, like all those things.
In my understanding, the issue with the native games is a lot of them basically, how would I say it? The games are ported in a way that makes them still operate the same way that like a regular package would, where if a package gets abandoned and its dependencies start getting very, very shifted from what is available on your system, you're just gonna have the game not work. So you sort of need people to like maintain their games like they would maintain anything else, and that's just not the way that games get made. Games are generally released and then maybe they get some patches afterwards, but if a game was released on Windows 7, it's probably not still being maintained today. It was just released and that's just it.
Yeah, but on Linux, the situation is a lot worse because most Linux ports are contracting jobs. So it's not someone from
Yeah.
the gaming like studio that ports the game. It's like a contractor, and then when the contract is done, when the game is shipped, it's over.
Yeah.
Like the game doesn't get updated anymore, unless there's like a very special request from the publisher to keep updating the game. I mean, that was happened with Rocket League. They ported the game on Linux, and it was one of the best Linux porter that did that. I mean, I think it was Timothy Bassett that worked on this port, and he worked on the initial like Quake 3 Arena Linux version. But then like Psionics, they updated their engine to, I don't know, DirectX 11 or 12, I don't know. And they were like, oh, we're not redoing this work all over again. And plus they were like also migrating to the Epic Store, which doesn't have like native Linux support. But yeah, that's basically it. They were like, oh, we're not going to repay a contractor to redo the work for Linux. Yeah, that's why like most Linux ports, they don't get updated, and in some cases you will have like community made patches, which are like really hard to do, like without access to the source code. I think in the case of Unreal Tournament, the first one, the guys from old Unreal, they have access to the source code, they just can't publish it.
Right.
But yeah, as you say, like games need to be maintained, and the only way to have like a game that works like in the foreseeable future is to have access to the source code. Like Quake 3 Arena, it's open source, so to this day it works well. You have like a Vulkan port. You have like you have like not only one option, but you have like tons of options to run like Quake 3. Same thing for like Quake 2. You have like open source ports. I mean, yeah, like having open source options is the definitive way of having Linux native game. If your game is closed source, then you kind of need to run it into its own sandbox.
Yeah.
Which Wine is. So Wine will run your game made for Windows 95 or Windows XP. It will be glad to do so. I know that Wine is not an emulator, but in some way it emulates like an old Windows system. Whereas we don't have a way currently to emulate an old like Ubuntu 10, for example, like Ubuntu 606. We no longer have a way unless we run like a virtual machine.
You can do
And even then,
DistroBox. That's an option. Just stick it in the Docker container.
Docker only has like you can only run like distros that are so old, like in Docker. So if you want, you can pretty much run Ubuntu 12, I think.
Okay,
but not run like Debian 3 or Ubuntu 6 or stuff that's really old. And even then, you're relying on your host systems like drivers, like graphics drivers and kernel to run the game. So a lot of the cases you'll have problems with the kernel or the drivers. And also, like when we're talking about really old games, sound is going to be a big issue because I've worked on some kind of like Docker layer for running old games, and it kind of works, except that you still need to have like a translation layer for OSS. And just yesterday, I was trying to get it working again, like Heretic 2, which is like a game that has been abandoned by everyone, by its publisher, by its developer, by Loki. I mean, Loki doesn't exist anymore, but there's like not real a community patch for it, and I still can get it running on Linux, but getting the sound in this game is like plain impossible. Even harder than that, and that one I abandoned a long time ago, because the reason I keep going back to Heretic 2 Linux is that the Windows version is also a pain to get working. The other one that's painful for Linux is like Kingpin, Life of Crime, which is impossible to get the sound working. Like you can get the game working with a lot of work, or at least you could like a few years ago. But to get the sound working and Kingpin, it's like really close to the hardware, like the sound hardware. So good luck getting any sound of that version. So just play for Kingpin. It's just better to play the Windows version. For Heretic 2, I'm still working on it.
I don't play any games that old, so my gaming experience is quite pleasant. But yeah, when you get to a certain age, it's just like, what do you do then? Because it's not old enough. Like, if you go old enough, right? If you go back to like the DOS era, we have emulators for that era, and most of them work pretty well. Obviously, you still get you don't get perfect sound because back then you had like a lot of games were built around a specific sound card, so you still have issues there with like recreating the sound like it should be.
In DOSBox, now you have like some really good emulation, like for like the Roland MT32, and a lot of those exotic sound cards, and they sound really good. I mean, I've not done a lot of tests for this, but I know that they've made a lot of progress, especially in DOSBox staging, which is the one we use in Lutris. They did work a lot on improving the sound quality in DOS games, especially those that use those high-end sound cards like MT32, which were supposed to be like the end of the line, like back in the day. And I think that now we are able to have this again. And to be honest, I think that DOSBox may be a solution to running those old Linux games, because I have some like Windows 3.1 or Windows 98 games that I run through DOSBox instead of Wine. So I need like a full copy of Windows installed, like a full copy of Windows 3.1 or Windows 98. But in the end, I mean, if we're working with a game that's really is too old to work with Wine reliably, then DOSBox is your next best bet, or like a PC emulator, like is it x86 box, not to be confused with box 86. So 86 box is like the fork of PCEM, and also you can emulate PCs with MAME. So MAME will emulate like an old like 486, which you can then install Linux on. The problem is still like, how do you get acceleration on it, like graphical acceleration? Something I talked to like a little like recently while I was at the Ubuntu Summit was there is this emulator called Technoparrot. Technoparrot it doesn't run. Yeah, it's like with a K, techno with a K, and parrot like the bird.
Yeah.
And it's meant for arcade games. It's like the successor of MAME. It's like MAME, but for like modern arcade games, which modern arcade games are basically PCs. And some of them are Linux PCs, not Windows PCs. So you have an emulator on Windows that runs Linux games with something that works kind of in a similar fashion than Wine. It's like Wine, but for Windows to run Linux programs. And also it emulates like some of the hardware that was shipped with those arcade machines. So this means that you can run those Linux games emulated in another like more modern operating system. But this is something that we don't have on our side. But this is something I would like to see, like an emulator of Linux from 2005, for example. And it emulates like everything from the hardware, like the graphics card. It gives you like, I don't know, like a TNT2 or and a creative sound card with the OSS API and the Mesa from back in the day and the kernel from back in the day. So anything that we will throw at it, it will be able to run it. But that's like really more like it's really focused on the preservation aspect because as I said, like most of those games, you can run like the Windows version of it. You'll have like much better support for it. You'll have more mods for it. You'll have like more community patches. So in general, like just sticking to the Windows versions. I mean, it's sad to say, but yeah, Harek Healer was also at the Ubuntu Summit recently. Wrote this blog post saying that Win32 is the most stable API for Linux.
Yeah, I've heard that plenty of times before.
Yeah, and this is true. I mean, this is true because now you want a binary. If it's like an old binary, you have like a lot more chances to run that old binary if it was made for Windows rather than it was made for Linux. Like, I don't know if you ever tried to get Netscape Navigator for Linux running on a modern distro.
I haven't thought of doing that, but
you have like software like Adobe Acrobat Reader for Linux,
right,
or Real Player for Linux, and all of those you can't run them. I mean, you can run them in Wine if you want, if you tinker enough, but like running them on Linux is kind of like a lost cause at this point, unless you work like in a VM. Yeah, I mean, not that we would need those software, but yeah, from a compatibility perspective, there's more stability in Wine than there is like just running natively. And I think this is something that can be fixed eventually if we cared enough, because like the reason why it's like this in this case is like most of our software is open source. So we just move on. I mean, we just leave like the old like closed source software just rot. Yeah, it doesn't get maintained. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you don't want to run something like Netscape Navigator, but you are. I think you are right about wanting to preserve these old games. So you talk a lot there about like game preservation. Are you the sort of person who cares about like physical hardware preservation, or do you want it just preserved in some form?
So I value like the hardware preservation. I think that's people who do like collect old games, maintain old game collections, and maintain like the old hardware working is really like an honorable goal. I think it's needed, but also I think that is really not the goal of Lutris. So the goal of Lutris is keeping games playable like in the simplest way possible on your current hardware without needing ordering systems on eBay, without needing like original medium. Because at some point, whether we talk about game consoles or old computers or like cartridges, like floppy disks, all that stuff, it will break at some point. I mean, at some point it will deteriorate. So whether it's like in 20 years, in like 50 years, in 100 years, those things are not eternal. So we need to have something to keep them alive, like without depending on the hardware, without depending on the original media. So yes, it's nice to have like that's kept alive, but as long as it works. I mean, Rust will do its job eventually, and at some point you'll no longer have like a single Super Nintendo working in the world. At some point there will be like no Super Nintendo ever working again. Okay, unless there's like some other models, but then the cartridges will disappear. nothing like material is eternal. While like digital data can be replicated and can be, and also improved upon. So you can improve the games. So you can play your PlayStation games upscaled. You can upscale them like 4 times or 6 times the original size, so they look a lot better on your high-res monitor. You can apply like shaders. You can use save states to beat those old school games that were like way too hard to beat back then, and then you can use like just save states to finally beat them and appreciate like the whole thing. So yeah, in that regard, Lutris is really more focused to just being able to play the game, not having to deal with like a physical collection.
And then someone's gonna say, "Oh, but you know that there are FPGAs that are designed to recreate the hardware." You're specifically talking about like the original hardware. Obviously, there are people doing like recreations, especially for that. Like, I know there's definitely NES stuff out there. I don't know if there's SNES stuff. But there are people that have like actually gone like literally just remade the entire system, and you can have like a modern version that has HDMI output, all of this stuff. But
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of those like mini consoles like SNES Classic
a lot of those are
or
just emulators.
yeah, those are like just mostly emulators. But you have what is it? The Mister, I think. The Mister is like a FPGA platform that's capable of running a lot of things. And that's good. That's good as well. Especially if it gives you a way to play your original cartridges that you couldn't play without like an original console. But then, I mean, some people say that they will be like way better than emulators. I mean, I haven't experienced really like those FPGA systems, but as far as I can tell, like emulators are really pretty good already. So I don't see like what could be improved from those emulators. If there are some things that make it better, I mean, sure. I mean, I'm all for it, but I'm more in the position where emulators are really good enough for like most things, and like 99.9% of people can't make the difference between an emulator and a FPGA.
Yeah,
So
I like
yeah, it's
taking
pretty
some of
much good
those.
enough.
I like taking some of those like early 3D games and then just upscaling it to 4K. They look really nice. Like
Yeah.
the models are obviously, you know, it's like low poly models, but everything like it looks way better than it would ever have looked on like a original console. And I know some people like that original. You know, I appreciate the people who like that original experience, right? But I like save states. Save states for me are like one of the biggest things. Like there are so many old games, especially that are really bad with how they offer you saves, or they have continue systems where if you die 5 times, you restart the entire game, things like that. I'm just like, I get wanting to have like the classic experience with it, but for me, it's not my thing. I appreciate it, but it's just not my thing.
It's not my thing either. And back then you had to enter cheat codes that you had into like magazines or like or have something like a game genie if you wanted to like circumvent some stuff. But yeah, that makes the games like a lot more accessible. Or if you had games that had like poor controls, like the control scheme was like kind of messed up, you can make the game like playable just by remapping everything and giving like better controls. Or games that were only playable like on keyboard and mouse, now you can make them playable on a joypad, or the other way around if you want. I mean, I mean, everything is possible. So you can really improve. What I like is when I see like games that are like totally like reverse engineered, like Diablo, for example. Diablo has like so many source ports, so you have like so many ways to run Diablo now that are sure you could run like the original Diablo, but then you can also run like one of the many like Devolution X or any other of the like source ports that make that improved on the game. And it's like what you said earlier, is that games, they need to be like maintained over time. And if it's not like the original publisher that does it, then the community eventually will take care
Yeah.
of it.
Well, in
For some
cases where a
games.
game is popular, like that's the
Yeah,
big
for popular
problem.
games.
And this is what you were saying before about like these live service games that have these reverse engineered servers. So there are games like MiHoYo does not like that it exists, but there is a reverse engineered server for Genshin Impact that exists. There is a reverse engineered server for Final Fantasy 14, but like these are giant games. If you're a live service game that has, 10,000 players, 5,000 players, the chances that someone is actually going to go through that process and actually reverse engineer a server is so much less likely that when these games are gone, they are just gone. And I get people not caring about it because right now, they care about what's happening. They care about the current content, and most people aren't programmers and can't sit down and actually go and do something like this, especially a reverse engineered server. Like, that's a massive project. But I don't know. It would, like, I can go back and play, I can go back and play like the first Pokemon game, for example, and it's in the exact same state it was always in. Like, there's, it's not attached to some server somewhere. It hasn't got like a bunch of patches that has like changed the experience. It just is the game that it always was, and that is nice. But I understand, like, from a business perspective, why these live service games exist. Like, they are a great way to make money. That's why they're done. But I don't know.
But making that the only thing that keeps the game alive, and say, okay, well, we're going to keep this live service running, and the day we're stopping this live service, the game is gone.
Yeah.
So some publishers are nicer about this than others.
I know the Dragon Quest MMO is getting a single player version soon, which is really cool.
I've noticed, like, I had a game like on EA app that I wanted to try, and that had anti-cheat, and then I noticed that it was taken down. It's called like Knockout City.
I think I know that one.
And that one, they made the game free, and they made the server free.
Wow.
So I thought that was like a pretty nice move. That's okay. You're shutting down the servers, but you're giving away the server the server so you can host your. So I didn't get the server to run in Wine because it involved like installing Postgres database and Redis, and I was like, maybe I don't want to install like Postgres in Wine. Maybe I can just use like a native one. And I was at some point I didn't care enough to keep going at it. Yeah, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool that they are giving this this stuff away, and yeah, being nice about it. In some other cases, like you have games that were using GameSpy, which is no longer a thing, but now you can use OpenSpy, which will let you play Unreal Tournament 2004 or all those games, like older games that's used GameSpy in the day and now can't run online. You have also like efforts like Pretendo that will re-implement services for the Wii U and the 3DS.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that one.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to try it and see if I can get like Splatoon multiplayer working with Pretendo. But yeah, I was already like pretty excited that I had like Splatoon on the Steam Deck working with the gyro, so that means I could control like the camera like by tilting the Steam Deck, and that was working like perfectly. I was like, that's really cool.
According to their numbers, it is 62% working on Splatoon, so maybe it's a little bit too soon to do that one, but it's coming along, so at some point you'll be able to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll have to see how it works. I mean, the thing is, when I tried it, it wasn't like the CMU. So CMU is like the emulator used. It wasn't the CMU from Lutris. It was a CMU from EmuDeck.
Mhm.
Because the EmuDeck had this like little script to install like the gyro mapper.
Mhm.
I was like, okay, I'm going to try that. But also, it wasn't the latest version of CMU that supports Pretendo.
Mhm.
So I'll have to look into it. But yeah, I just think that's kind of neat. That it's possible now to have access to those online games.
Yeah, it wouldn't it be cool if they abandon the game and they're just like, hey, I have the software. Like that'd just be cool. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes people just don't wait for the authorization.
Mhm.
Um, they they will just like reverse engineer the service, which is
Mhm.
like I don't know how. I mean, sometimes some services must be easier than others
Mhm.
to reverse engineer. Um, but yeah, that's. I mean, it's always harder like to keep something like this running than just like the game itself.
Like we think
The
about like
game you have it, but
Mhm.
the service. I mean, you don't even have the code. You don't have the binaries. You don't have anything.
like you think about like the early id games, for example, where they're like, here, just have the source code. Like the
Yeah.
game's abandoned, whatever, we don't care. Go. Do whatever you want.
Um, I mean, they haven't done that in a while.
Yeah, it's their
Uh,
old stuff, but even so, like the fact they did it for anything is kind of crazy. Like that's
yeah.
I can't think of any other big studios at least that ever did that.
Some games were open source, but yeah, not nothing as big as the id Software
Mm.
games. Yeah, yeah, maybe since like the Bethesda ZeniMax acquisition, they stopped doing that.
Mm.
Because if we look at the time frame between when Quake 3 was released
Mhm.
and when it was open sourced, then by that standard, we should get like open source Doom, like the 2016 one, maybe. um, I don't know, like maybe not like Doom, but at least like Wolfenstein, like the newer Wolfenstein game should be like would be open source. But yeah, or Rage, maybe. Do you remember
Maybe.
Rage?
I
Maybe
do
Rage.
remember. I don't think I ever played Rage.
Yeah, that was kind of neat. But yeah, we haven't seen like a recent release open source, and I hope that at some point we will.
Mm.
I mean, it would. Uh, I mean, sure, like back then the games were like smaller in size, they were less complex, they were less middleware because now you have to take care of, okay, I can release the source code, but I can't release this copyrighted middleware
Yeah.
stuff that's like that has like that was like a challenge of like open source game like in the past. It was you first have to remove a bunch of stuff that you can't ship open source
Mhm.
because you don't have to write to them, and then you can make the game open source.
Yeah, yeah.
So that might be like a bigger problem like for modern games.
Mhm. Yeah, I've looked at some of the most games will include like a list of like libraries and stuff they have included in them. Especially the big games where, they're probably going to get audited and asked about like what's in the game. And you can usually
Mm.
see a good list to like what they have. And whilst there's a lot of open source libraries for sure, there's also a lot of stuff where they've paid a lot of money for it, and those companies definitely don't want that publicly released because even
Mm.
if it just gets publicly released, even if it is proprietary, people are going to try to reverse engineer it, all that stuff, and they just don't want to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, what I'm hopeful is that maybe we'll see like more decompilations. That's something
Mm.
we see more and more like in the recent years. We're saying like especially for N64 games or like PlayStation games.
I know there was a
What I'm
project.
hopeful,
Go on.
yeah, for PC games, like especially why not having decompilations for Linux games so that we can just swap out like the old audio APIs or the old
Mm.
like graphics APIs for like more modern ones, or have just something that's can be built like on more modern systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my favorite of one of these decompilations is a game that I grew up playing a lot of, the Jack and Daxter series.
Mm-hmm.
The Open Goal project is really cool. Like they've actually gotten, I believe they've gotten the first game fully working on PC now, which is super cool. Like really, really cool. I don't
Yeah, it's
understand how
always.
it's done. I don't get it at all. Like these people know they are a lot smarter than I am, and I am very happy they're out there.
Oh yeah, and I have no idea what's going on there, like or how they do that, or how you would get started in such a project. But yeah, I'm really glad that some people have the skills to work on that
Mhm.
sort of things. Yeah, that's
So,
really cool. If I'm not mistaken,
mhm.
like there was a really old decompilation of StarCraft where you could play StarCraft on Raspberry Pi.
Okay.
Um, and that was like I think at least 10 years ago.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
that
that is almost 10 years ago. 2014, going on 10 years this year.
nice.
Open Pandora is what it was called.
Oh, Open Pandora is like
Or is this a different one?
the hardware. Like that was like before the Steam Deck. That was like this little Linux handheld. So yeah, it was
Oh.
running on Open Pandora. But yeah, I remember about that Pandora console. I kind of really badly wanted one before like there
Pandora
were like
console?
Steam Decks.
I don't even know what this one was. I must have missed this.
It was like kind of like a Nintendo DS, but it ran Linux.
Hmm. Oh. Oh, okay.
And it was really expensive for what it was, so that's why it didn't get a lot of traction. But it was really neat. I mean, having like a fully like portable Linux desktop in your hands, that was really cool.
This is really cool looking. Okay, yeah, I can see why you wanted one.
Hmm.
That's awesome. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, okay. I definitely would have wanted one back then if I knew what it was.
Yeah, and I think that like the modern version of it is called the Pyra,
The Dragon
which
Box Pyra, yes.
yes, so
Oh, it looks exactly the same.
it's kind of the same thing, yeah.
Mm.
And you have your little I don't know, XFCE or GNOME desktop on it, and
I'm gonna say that's
yeah, I've
XFCE.
seen. Yeah, you have like some x86 emulation on it. I've seen people like run Windows games on it with
Oh.
like virtualizing like the x86 CPU. Yeah.
Mm. That's so cool. That is awesome. So this is from 2016, and then wait, the first production model had been so they shipped the first production model in 2020. Okay. Jeez, they took a long time to get
Oh,
that shipped.
it was a thing for. I mean, I waited for that like for a really long time, and was always like a little bit too pricey for what it was.
Mhm.
I mean, it was really like an enthusiast product. So um, if you have like a lot of money to spend into those kind of things, I mean, it's fine.
Mhm.
It wasn't. It was never like the really good deal you could have like with the Steam Deck, where the
Mhm.
Steam Deck is like a powerhouse, but it's still pretty cheap.
Yeah.
So here you have something that's not nearly as powerful, but is also a lot more expensive than the Steam Deck. So it's like, yeah, maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you really want one and have like that kind of money to spare.
The Steam Deck has the advantage of like the console market though, where they can sell it at a reduced price and then make up the difference on game sales.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure they're losing money on the Steam Deck sales. I mean, if they have a good deal with AMD on their like chipsets,
I can't
they
imagine they're
could
making that much money on it though. Like it's
they might not be. I mean, especially like not on the cheaper models. But when you bring up the price a bit up, like for the 1 terabyte model, for example,
Mm.
then yeah, I can imagine that they're making some money at least.
Maybe. Well, either way, it's a crazy powerful system for what it is. Like I've got one sitting back on the shelf there. Um, I'm genuinely impressed with how, like, with what that thing can run. Like I'll
Yeah.
boot up a modern game, like a relatively modern game that I was like, it just runs fairly well. Maybe I need to tone down the settings a little bit, but the fact that you can play like Elden Ring, for example, on a handheld console and it doesn't instantly turn off by running out its battery, like that's wild. That is absolutely crazy.
Yes, yes, absolutely. This is something that I've dreamed of like for the longest time, and it was like, yeah, it's finally here. I wanted this kind of like form factor, like PC, but like in a console form factor, and this was something I was like dreaming of, and it was like, yeah, they made this. I found a grand total of one game that I couldn't play on the Steam Deck,
Mm-hmm.
and that is like the new Avatar game. That
Oh,
is
right. Did that come out? I actually forgot about that one.
it's a game that I got for free with my new processor.
Ah.
So they were giving that game away with Ryzen 7 CPUs,
Mm-hmm.
and I had some trouble initially getting it to run on my computer, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try it on the Steam Deck. And while it did launch, I could only run like the benchmark for like 2 or 3 seconds, and then the game would crash because there's simply not enough RAM. It's a RAM
Oh.
issue.
Oh.
As you have, if the Steam Deck had like 32 gigs of RAM,
Mm.
it would handle this game. But right now, since you have to share like 16 gigs with both the game, like the RAM and the VRAM,
Mhm.
then at some point it will make some games like not playable.
Right.
And that's the only one. I mean, you have people saying like, "Oh, Starfield is not playable on the Steam Deck." Well, I've put like a lot of hours in Starfield on the Steam Deck. I can tell you that. Yeah, all those games that are like The Last of Us. Also, like some people said that it wasn't really optimized for the Steam Deck, but the game received like a lot of patches, and now it runs a lot better.
Mhm.
So yeah, even like the high end stuff, and even then, I mean, like, this Steam Deck is not really like it's not the best case. Like you have like a lot of other games like platformers or indie games that are much more enjoyable on the
Mhm.
Steam Deck. But even like the more like AAA ones are like really nice and
Mm.
enjoyable.
Yeah, don't expect to play like, the latest Unreal Engine 5 game at max settings. Like that's just not going to happen.
Mm,
But
yeah.
if you want to turn the settings down a bit, or like I play a lot of I played a lot of Vampire Survivors on the Steam Deck. That's a game that's horribly optimized on no matter what it plays on. Games like that play fine, no issue at all.
Yeah.
I've been playing the Yakuza series on the Steam Deck as well, and I'm just impressed that I've always wanted a handheld system that can play my PC games, and yeah, they've existed in the past, but this is the first one where it's like legitimately powerful enough to be a good experience.
Yeah, it ran Linux, and it's like not overpriced because you had all those like Aya Neos and all that stuff that were like
Very expensive,
they were here before the Steam Deck, but they were like very expensive. And also you have to take into account that they were shipping with Intel GPUs, like and that was like before the good Intel GPUs existed. So you had basically laptop performance on your handheld at a premium price and with Windows. And I don't know if you could install Linux on those devices. I'm not sure, but you would maybe hit some driver issues. Yeah, now you have like the Lenovo Legion that runs Linux pretty well. even if it's like not it's not a AMD RDNA2 as a GPU. I mean, it will still run Linux.
Funny that you mentioned
Yeah,
Ioneo because they actually have their own Linux distro now. This is a fairly new campaign. I don't know what they were doing at the time, but yeah, now they actually do have their own Linux thing.
yeah, they do have Linux now, but they didn't like before the Steam Deck was a thing.
Yeah, it's only like
They
this year they
only
started
shipped
doing it.
they shipped Windows.
And Linux, Windows on a handheld device is Windows not made for a small form factor device. We'll say that. It can work, but
I mean, as long as you run like the Steam Deck UI, I
sure,
mean,
yeah,
I
that's
guess you're good.
just don't look
I
at the
mean,
desktop.
it would be the same thing. I mean, you could say the same thing for KDE. I mean, KDE is like not really made for
Yeah, that's very true
small
though.
form factor as well. I mean, KDE is pretty similar to Windows in its presentation. But hey, I went to Europe a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
and I didn't have a laptop. I had a Steam Deck. That was it. I mean, I had like a tablet, but that I barely never used.
Mhm.
Yeah, like most of the things I wanted to do, I did on a Steam Deck, and it was like fine.
Mhm.
But yeah, you could use one as a laptop replacement.
Mhm. So when the Steam Deck came around, obviously that would have gotten a lot of attention onto Lutris as well. So what was that sort of like? How much extra attention did Lutris started getting? How many people did you get just not understanding what the project was altogether? Just what was the general experience like when that came around for you?
Um, a little bit stressful, to be honest, because at the beginning I was like, oh, the Steam Deck is being released, and I don't have a Steam Deck. I don't have a way to test on the Steam Deck.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I reached out to Valve, and they did send me like a dev kit.
Oh wow!
So I was like, okay, cool. Now I can progress on Lutris on the Steam Deck. I think the first version of Lutris that was shipped on the Steam Deck was kind of rough,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like pushed a lot of people away. And that's why, I mean, all things considered, there are a lot of people using Lutris on the Steam Deck.
Mm-hmm.
But what you will see in the media is not a lot of the time is not centered toward Lutris. You'll have a lot of things that use EmuDeck, a lot of things using Eric,
Mm-hmm.
or a lot of things using just plain Steam without using like any kind of other like software.
Mm-hmm.
So like the Steam Deck gave more exposure also to all those other projects. And it's clear that the Lutris is still used quite a bit on the Steam Deck, but I'm not sure it's increased its usage overall, like by a whole lot. I mean, I don't think it was like that much like if that's noticeable because
Right.
people if they wanted just Epic Games, they would install Heroic. If they wanted, I don't know. I know that a lot of people who wanted like EA app would just install EA app on, because yeah, it's about like if you only care about just one or two games,
Mm-hmm.
then Lutris starts to make less sense.
Right.
Lutris is really optimized to let you manage your game collection, and that is like quite a bit of a large collection.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, you still have the convenience of being able to install games like really easily, like in a few clicks.
Mm-hmm.
You have like an install script and all of that, but it's not that hard, yeah, to install EA app just on Steam or install like doing the same thing on Heroic. Heroic will save you the trouble of installing an extra launcher, so you only need Heroic. You don't need the Epic Game Store.
Right.
You only need that. So yeah, Lutris was always focused on making the original launchers work. I mean,
Mhm.
not for GOG because I mean we can like bypass GOG Galaxy, but in the case of Epic, I mean, especially since we received a donation from Epic for bringing the Epic Game Store to Linux.
Wait, what? I didn't hear about
I
this.
was about like we received like the Epic Mega Grants
Oh.
in 2019, and that was I mean we had like some discussions with the team of the Unreal Engine team, and it was very clear that I received that grant because Lutris was able to run like the Epic Game Store.
Mhm.
If it was a reimplementation of the Epic Game Store, that would maybe be different.
Mhm.
But what they wanted was the actual Epic Game Store running on Linux, and
Mhm.
that was why they gave the grant. So I wasn't going to say, okay, I'll take your money, but then I'm going to replace your store with another like open source launcher.
Right.
That wouldn't make like a lot of sense. And especially, I was also glad that since a lot of people would ask for that, a lot of people would ask for an open source implementation. I was glad that Eric came along and did that, just as like the same thing as Bottles did the same thing with the wine manager that it didn't want to implement.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's always
I must
good.
have
Yeah.
completely missed that story when that happened then.
Yeah, it was like in
Mm.
2019, like in the mid 2019, I think, and like Linux was starting to get pretty big, but it wasn't like as big as now because
Do you remember what year
like, the Steam Deck
Proton
wasn't
was? Was
2018
Right.
or
Okay. So it was like
2017.
just after like Linux gaming was starting to become like an actual platform that you could. Obviously, Wine was there for a long time before, but
Yeah, but
having Proton they
before
made it
like
a lot easier.
so that's yeah, having Proton and before Proton having DXVK.
Mhm.
I mean,
Oh,
there
DXVK
was
was massive. Yeah.
yeah, there was like a little like a few months with where DXVK was a thing and Proton was not yet a thing,
Mm.
and that was my initial surprise. I mean, it was like more of a surprise than TeamOS or the Steam Deck. That was like the biggest surprise. That was Proton because that was basically doing what Lutris did for like the past several years, but in Steam, which is not like a small open source project like Lutris was, which is like a massive game launcher used by millions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, at that point, I was like so much like working on like stability, like making things more stable. And I was like, how is it possible that a big company is using that solution? Because it's, in my eyes, it was not stable enough.
Mm-hmm.
We were not ready yet. But what I didn't know was that Val was going to put an enormous amount of resources into all those projects. They would push like the wine development. They would push the DXVK development. They would push like Mesa development even. So even the drivers at the driver level, they would bring improvement in gaming, and that I wasn't aware of that because if they were just going to take wine at the state at that point in time and DXVK at that point in time, I was like, that's crazy because it's good. I mean, I enjoy it's enjoyable that they're like taking that into consideration,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like also kind of a crazy idea because it's very like uh, almost a tinker toy at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And for a big company like Valve doing the same thing as we were doing, it was seemed like out of this world. So and it did in the end it would turn out really great because um, this meant that we got all the improvements from Valve into Lutris as well. So every like GOG game, every Epic game, every Ubisoft game would benefit from those improvements done by Valve.
Yeah, it's great that they didn't try to do something themselves like that. That's what you expect most companies to do. They'll like come into a space and be like, okay, you guys are doing your thing over there, but yeah, we're not going to do that. Like, maybe
Yeah,
we'll take that project and then make like a proprietary fork of it. No, they didn't. They just We're like, okay, we're going to be good members of the open source space. We're going to contribute back upstream. We're going to do our thing and make everything just generally better. And that's really surprising that it happened, but I'm happy that it has, and I'm happy that it wasn't just like a short-term project. Like, they are very committed to doing this, and with the Steam Deck coming out, it seems like they're committed for like the long term here. This isn't just, a one-time project that they're gonna ditch after it's done. Or even going back to like the original SteamOS, like Proton is sort of a continuation of that project. Obviously, it's a whole different thing, but it's still that like same idea of trying to make Linux a legitimate gaming platform.
Yeah.
It's just now they have a much better approach to it, and it seems like I hope that nothing happens with Valve management where they decide they want to ditch this project, because what they've done is turned an OS that you could game on if you had a lot of technical knowledge and you knew how to configure Wine and do all of this, to a platform that you can just, for many games, just click play and you don't have to think about anything. Maybe you need to run a different Proton version. Maybe you need like a single option to include, but a lot of games don't even need that. You just run it and it just works. And that's not something that could have been said, 5, 6+ years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like been so much progress done. Like, it's very it's been wild. And if you compare, like, if you go back even before that, where Wine was like very heavily into development, where we didn't have any solution for DX11. So basically, any DX11 game, you could forget about it. I mean, the progress made is like spectacular. And you were talking about like proprietary, like alternative. Like, I don't know if you remember, but before I was working on Lutris, I was using something called Sidiga, and Sidiga was this proprietary fork of Wine. That was the continuation of WineX. So WineX was the initial fork of Wine, which I think triggered a license change on Wine's end, so that like no one else could do like the same thing again. They didn't want like people to do their closed fork of Wine. But yeah, WineX was basically Wine that was optimized for games, and then you had Sidiga, with what was basically a graphical interface on top of WineX. And basically it made playing Left 4 Dead and Portal really, really easy. But that was basically it. I mean, that was 2008, 2009.
2009 is the last ever release it has on the Wikipedia.
And that was like I remember because I was playing Left 4 Dead, which was a 2009 game. So it must have been like around that time. And that was basically around that time that Lutris started. And I remember at the very first, like the start of Lutris, we had Sidiga as a runner. It would like kind of replace like Proton back then. It was okay, instead of Wine, you can use Sidiga if you bought it. Because that was like a paid product.
Well, the other problem
since then,
the other problem with it being proprietary is if, they abandoned it in, 2011 it looks like, and then the company shut down in 2016. So that's just gone.
Yeah.
If Valve ever decides that they want to move away from Proton, obviously they are like the massive drivers behind it, and they're the reason why it's become so good, but if they abandon it, that doesn't mean it's just gone. Like,
Proton is still here. Proton is still here. I mean, you have like Glorious Agrol, who maintains Wine GE, and Wine GE is basically Proton GE, which is basically Proton. So Wine GE is the difference between, because a lot of people ask to run Proton in Lutris, like the Proton proper, and I tell them like, no, that's not necessary, because Wine GE is Proton, except that there's like some Steam specific bits that have been removed and replaced by their wine, like original wine behavior. But there's like no difference between Proton like and wine GE. So if for whatever reason Proton stopped being developed by Valve, it would still be here. I mean, it would still, like Code Weavers would still exist, and WineG would still exist, and DXVK would still exist, and BKD 3D would still exist, and all of those would, in their own rights, well, you could still put them together. And just like we did that before Proton was a thing, when it was not called Proton yet, we were just having like Wine plus DXVK. Where, well, we can do the same thing after. I mean, if Proton stops being we could do the exact same thing. It's just that Valve puts so much effort, and they are still doing it to this day. Where they are putting efforts in making HDR work.
Yeah, that's a big one. I didn't think that was happening anytime soon.
I mean, now, I mean, I don't know how much work Valve has put into Plasma's side of things, but apparently next month we're getting HDR on the desktop on Plasma.
I know. I know what you're talking. I think it's
Plasma 6 is supposed to ship with HDR.
I don't think it's full desktop support. That's my.
Or at least in games.
Yeah, it's definitely in games. Yeah. Which is, like, I remember reading about. I know, like 5 or so years ago, Red Hat was talking about doing some HDR stuff, and then like, there's been a lot of meetings and a lot of discussions about HDR, and obviously that work has been important. And last year, there was the Red Hat HDR Hackfest or whatever it was called. I don't remember the exact name.
Yeah.
And that was obviously a big thing as well. And then you can just play HDR games in GameScope now. Like,
yeah, and it works. I mean, it works on desktop. Like, it's not only limited to the Steam Deck OLED. Of course, that worked ish because I've had some experiences where it didn't. But I've also ran HDR games here on my desktop computer by just installing the GameScope session in Nobara. And I've played Doom Eternal, Cyberpunk, Horizon Zero Dawn, and I'm not sure if I get the right render. Like, Doom Eternal looks pretty much awesome on HDR. Cyberpunk and Horizon Zero Dawn have this kind of like toned down colors.
Yeah, I noticed that with Armored Core 6 as well.
And very bright. When you have like fire or explosions and stuff like that, it gets very bright. But the base color seems to be toned down, and I'm not sure if that's supposed to be the case, because it does look more realistic in some way, but also it makes the game look pretty gray. But yeah, I would like to have some kind of point of comparisons, like, okay, this is what it's supposed to look like in HDR, and that's what we're getting now. Also, I have like a pretty old HDR monitor. I don't know if it has like the latest standards that are needed. Like, I think I need like HDR 10, but yeah, I don't have that at the moment.
My understanding is some games are also fairly lazy with how they do HDR. So it could also just be that those aren't great examples of HDR.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to make sure that at least we get the render that you would get on a Windows computer or a PlayStation 5, for example.
Yeah, if it's still bad at the end, then that's just a problem with the game itself, and no amount of work here is going to fix that. So where do you see, or where do you hope to see Linux go as a gaming platform? Because right now it's in a pretty good state. And it's
Yeah.
hard to imagine how it really gets better outside of the anti-cheat stuff, but what would you like to see happen?
Um, yeah, that's a good question because, as you said, there's like a lot of stuff that has already been done. I wonder if the next step is related to gaming or is just improving the Linux desktop as in general,
Mm-hmm.
like just improving the quality, just perfecting stuff. Um, like now that we have most things working, it's going to be a lot of like polishing stuff and
Mm-hmm.
making things like really easy to use and really user friendly and really predictable, more than having some big breakthrough. Because yeah, what more can you want? I mean, there's already like a bunch of games that will run better on Linux than on Windows. I don't know, like PlayStation 5 emulation, Xbox One S emulation, maybe. I mean, I'm just starting to get like Xbox 360 games running on Linux. So
Oh,
yeah, yeah, the Xenia emulator is like
wait,
sort of.
they have Linux support now? I thought they were still.
No, they don't. They don't. But you can run the emulator in Wine and
Wait,
run
wait,
Xbox
so you're
360.
running the you're running Xbox emulation through the not Windows emulation on Linux.
Yes, which is something we did back then with Dreamcast. I mean, the Dreamcast emulator at some point in Lutris
Mm-hmm.
was NullDC, which didn't have a Linux port. So we used Wine to run NullDC, and now we
Mm-hmm.
have like tons of fancy Dreamcast emulators. But yeah, back then we didn't have one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not new as a concept. The thing is, we don't have like Xenia as a runner, so you can't like download Xenia from the Lutris UI unless
Right.
you use like the script on the
Mm-hmm.
website. Um, but yeah, that's the thing. Another recent one was PS Vita. PS Vita. I mean, I tried it like a few months ago, and I was like, oh no, that's not playable. And I retried it like recently, a few weeks ago, and I was like, that's great. That runs great.
Mm-hmm. Is that with Vita 3K or is there another one?
Yeah, Vita 3K. That's I think it's the only one, and that is Linux native.
Mm.
I don't know
Yep.
how much I can work on like command line stuff for Vita 3K, so I don't know if it's possible to have a Lutris runner.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know if it's possible to type a command line and have a game launcher directly, or if you have to fire up like Vita 3K and then go through the menu, because
Right.
it pretty much replicates a PS Vita menu. So is
Mm.
there a way to launch things from like the command line? I don't know. That's the requisite to have a Lutris runner. But yeah, I mean, outside of more emulators, in Lutris specifically, we need to implement cloud saves. That's a big thing. We need to implement like a full screen game UI, like the Steam Deck UI.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we're going to ship Lutris 1.0 when that's done.
Wait, is it not? Wait, wait, what version is Lutris
It's
right
it.
now?
We're right now with Lutris 1.5, 1.14,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, I think we plan 0.6 to be the GTK4 port,
Ah.
and once, I mean, during the port of like 2 GTK4, we're likely going to ship also as well like the cloud saves.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of stuff that are related to ratings as well. I
Mm-hmm.
would like to work with Proton DB as well. Maybe include like Lutris games into Proton DB. Have setting like rating done differently, but that's work that has to be done on the website, on the API, and all that stuff. Um,
I think.
yeah, on the Linux gaming side itself, there's not much left to do.
I think if Lutris had a like full screen UI back when the Steam Deck came out, maybe people would have reacted to it a little bit differently, because that's one of the things that MUDeck does really well. Like they have a nice UI that fits in with what like the Steam Deck is. But Lutris, it's a desktop application. And that's not a bad thing, but it feels kind of out of place.
I mean, yeah, for sure, because the thing is, you go to the KDE on your Steam Deck, you install your games on Lutris, and then you create those Steam Deck shortcuts, and then you go back into game mode and you run your game through there.
Mm-hmm.
But for MUDeck, I think it was pretty much the same thing, because you had to go into the desktop mode,
You
fire up
did,
an
but
application,
yeah, but
and it would create like the shortcuts into the. There's probably some more automations than compared to Lutris.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I will have to look into, and better integration with the Steam Deck UI would be nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that people would want to run like two different UIs on the Steam Deck. Having a good integration with the game UI, I mean, that was one of the reason why I stopped kind of working on that full screen UI for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Was because okay, there's already a big one UI that works pretty well, that has like not only an ability to launch games, but also to remap inputs, to
Mm-hmm.
have like
Mm-hmm.
on the Steam Deck, you can limit FPS, you can do a whole bunch of stuff that you couldn't do like on the Lutris side.
So it's better to
So
just integrate with that.
Yeah, better to just create Steam shortcuts and use on top of like a build on top of that. Not only it's a lot faster, it's a lot quicker to ship like that integration than just to have to rebuild basically Lutris from the ground up. Yeah, and that pushed like the Godot UI on the back burner a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So if we did build one like a full screen UI, I think it would mostly be for TVs, for
Right.
like people
Okay.
who want to have like a Lutris console.
Okay,
I say
yeah, that's
Lutris
fair.
consoles, but like not. This is a concept that I want to help push. Is so okay. We have the Steam Decks, so it's a Linux console that's a handheld.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have like a gaming console that's on your TV, that's like hooked on your TV, and use that like as a gaming system?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like I'm still not sure like how to proceed with that, because there's like playing games on the TV, but also there's like a lot of playing games that are not really like FPS games, for example. I mean, you'll always be like more comfortable playing on a keyboard and mouse rather than playing on TV. So I've experimented with like different setups, some like hybrid where you can play on the TV for part of the game and switch to keyboard and mouse. Like, yeah, it's kind of like it's not something that's like commonly done like before, like having the TV merge with like the PC gaming like together. Right now you have either people playing on PC or people playing on a console, and
Well, that's what Steam
you
Big
don't
Picture Mode was
see.
originally supposed to be.
Yeah, it was supposed to be that, but then you are left with all those games that, I mean, sure, like the Steam controller was supposed to fix all of this,
Yeah.
but you'll never beat a keyboard and mouse for like a lot of games still. So yeah,
I think
we'll
if
see.
there's
I mean, this.
if there's one thing we could see actually improve with Linux gaming like over the next coming years, it's having these launchers offer native versions of themselves. Not just having to run the launcher through Wine to then run the games through Wine. Actually having like, a native version of EA's stuff and Ubisoft stuff and Blizzard stuff. And obviously there is with Epic the heroic stuff, so you don't necessarily need that. But either open versions or native versions of those proprietary clients.
And open versions, that's kind of like, it's trickier. I mean, that one thing that's because I noticed that most of the time is that Epic Games doesn't ship a DRM on top of the, like in addition to the DRM that's already present in the game.
Mhm.
Like you don't have a requirement for the Epic Games launcher to be open for you to launch a game from the Epic Game Store.
Mhm.
So that's why Heroic Launcher is able to exist.
I
Is
wasn't aware of
that
that.
basically, yeah, you don't need. Sometimes you'll need like Epic Store, Epic Game Services, or
Yeah.
Epic Online Services, but you don't have a requirement for Epic Game Store to be open. Whereas, like, good luck launching Overwatch without BattleNet,
That's fair.
or same thing for like Battlefield. If you want to launch Battlefield, you'll need to open EA app, and it's the same thing for like Steam. Even for Steam games, if you have like a Ubisoft game on Steam, then when Steam does, it installs Ubisoft Connect, launches Ubisoft Connect, and then I mean it gets kind of crazy. So I'm not sure what I do get what you want.
Well, I would like,
And it
if
would be
that's not
really nice to
possible,
have.
I would like to see
And
like
having
a native version of those clients. That would be nice.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like impossible because most of those clients they use either
It's just,
Qt
yeah, they're just
or
glorified web browsers for the most part.
WebKit.
Yeah.
Yeah, a browser. I mean, it's all stuff that's here on Linux, and it's not that hard to do. And then you have to build up some kind of Proton integration into it.
Mhm.
But that's basically it. But I don't know if that would be. I mean, without the publisher, like without EA or Ubisoft or Blizzard going in and doing the work,
Yeah.
I don't think that's something that's possible. It's like you don't have like an open source implementation on Steam,
Mhm.
so you can't really do the same thing with Steam. You have Valve that makes like the Steam for Linux and then brings the Proton integration, and you can't have it like any other way because you need Steam to run the Steam games,
Mhm.
and it can't be like some kind of open source re-implementation.
Well, as Tim Sweeney said, when the platform has tens of millions of users, I guess then he'll consider it.
I mean, at that point, I'm wondering like how many millions of users are there like right now, because I mean we must be getting pretty close. That means that they're going to reconsider.
How many users does Steam have? Steam users. How many users are on Steam? 132 million monthly active users. So about 2% of that are Linux users. So what is that? Like 2.5 million? Something like that?
All right, so yeah, maybe not enough millions for Team Sweeney, but I don't know. It seems that they have Fortnite on so many platforms, and it seems that they have Fortnite on platforms that are much smaller than Linux. I mean, even who plays like Fortnite on the phone? I don't know, like anyone who plays Fortnite on the
Every
phone.
single child in the entire world. There are...
Is it playable? Are they playing like some kind of like Razer Kishi or?
They're playing on a touch. I don't get it. I honestly do not understand how kids play games, but it's a common thing to now play games just on a touchscreen and play a shooter on a touchscreen.
Yeah, that's kind of wild into my perspective, but okay.
You were talking about playing Heretic too, so your taste in video games is sort of, it's a little bit distant to what, a 12-year-old's playing now.
Yeah, but I've tested like recently. I wanted to try out Roblox, see if it was working great on Linux, and it does. It does run on Linux. You have to use like Flatpak and some kind of like special launcher for Roblox. But yeah, I mean, okay, I didn't get the game. I didn't get like what the game was about really. So yes, it is kind of strange, but at least it does run for like And that's another thing. Is like all those Android and iPhone games, it's very hard to preserve them. And I've been like working, I've trying to kind of get like those like bundles from Humble Bundle that's
Mhm.
used to give you Android games.
Mm.
Well, most of them, like most of those games, don't run on Android like at the moment.
Mhm.
So I don't know what solutions we have for them.
I guess it's the same solution as the Linux problem. You just need to emulate old versions, and at least there's a lot of dev tools for doing Android stuff, so it's not as big of a problem. Like you can run fairly old versions of Android. I don't know how far back you can reasonably go though. Um, so maybe it's not a complete perfect solution as it currently stands.
Yeah. Also, you need to be on the same architecture. So there's I've tried like I have a VM of Android x86.
Mhm. Oh.
And I've had some limited success with it running games. I've had some success. First thing is like a bunch of stuff won't work if you don't have a touchscreen. So you need a touchscreen to run like most stuff. And a lot of stuff won't run with if you don't have like an ARM processor.
Mhm.
And there is this translation layer called libhoudini.
Mhm.
I think it's made by Intel and it's not maintained anymore. I don't think it is. I've tried to download it and I couldn't find a way to get it working. So if anyone has knowledge to how to make libhoudini work for Android, then yeah, tell me about it. I want to know.
I am just discovering this exists right now, so uh maybe someone knows about it. Maybe.
Yeah,
Last
running
update.
running libhoudini in QMU in 2024. That would be interesting.
Well, we are just getting towards the 2 hour mark now, so I guess it's about time that we end off the show. Um, if somebody wants to get involved with Lutris, where is the best place to go?
There's plenty on the GitHub. There's like a tag, a tag called Open to Community, where basically I put everything that I know that I have very low chance working on.
Mhm.
So if you're interested in one of those things, it's a pretty good way to get started. Or like any open issue really, or even if there's like no open issue, then maybe. So yesterday we have like a Lutris release that's just out the door. It's going to be released like tomorrow or like the day after. So I went on GitHub and like made sure like all the issues were correctly labeled and like nothing that's still open that should be closed. So right now we should only have like issues that are valid that should be worked on. So anything that's still open is game for anyone. If there's like anything more involved, like oh, I want to do this thing that's really kind of big development,
Mhm.
don't start anything big without like talking to me before. Because if you do like if you put like weeks of development into something and you say, okay, I've done this, and I'm like, yeah, I mean that doesn't fit the project at all. You've done all of this for nothing. Sorry. Then yeah, I would prefer not have to say that.
Mhm.
So just tell me, okay, I'm going to do this awesome thing that's like going to take a few weeks of development, and it's going to be like this and like this and like this. Um, and I will be okay. Yeah, I can bring some advice on how to proceed for the development.
Mhm.
I currently have like this PR that is about accept like registering multiple accounts for a service, like
Mhm.
multiple accounts for GOG or multiple accounts for EA app. And basically the work has been done, but it broke so much stuff outside of that feature. And I was like, no, we can't merge that. I mean, and I don't have a good way to make it fit, like make that code fit into whatever, like where we should be, like what direction the project should be going. So
Mhm.
uh, I think like the only solution is to just like redo the whole work from scratch and take a different approach. So I want to avoid this kind of stuff. Other than that, you need like to have some knowledge with Python. If you have some knowledge with Godot and want to get started on like full screen UI, I mean that would be cool because I have like very little knowledge of Godot, and we need people with like good experience with Godot. Yeah, if you have like good experience with wine, you can help Glorious Eggroll work on like making patches with Wine GE. That's always useful. Yeah, there's also a lot of work to do on the websites. The website is kind of like gets less visibility than the full projects, but it is open source as well. It is Python as well. In my opinion, it is pretty easy to work on, but I've had a lot of experience with Django in the past, so maybe
it's
it's not
Django, is it?
as
Oh,
yeah, it's a Django, so it's pretty
Django's
standard.
fun.
Yeah, yeah. So that's about it. I mean, there's of course, if you want to write a Bash script for one thing we appreciate is when we have received builds for like open source projects, open source games. So we have this repo on GitHub called Lutris/buildbots, and if you look into it, we have all the build scripts for Wine, for all the runners, for DOSBox, for MAME, and also for all the game engines. So we'll have like Serious Sam, or we'll have Quake, or we'll have Doom, or everything that's open source. We'd like to have like a build script. Now Flatpak has kind of replaced kind of all that. If you want an open source game, the best way to get it is like through Flatpak, FlatHub. So it's really nice to have like a FlatHub integration in Lutris, because that will bring you like a whole lot of open source games just available with one click. We don't have to maintain builds. That's maintained by FlatHub. I mean, that's a pretty neat stuff. But still, we still appreciate having those scripts around. And that those can still be useful. So yeah, if basically I want people to push them to build their own like preservation console. So that means they try to install every game they have played during the course of their lives, since they were like a little kid to now. And they have all those games accessible. It's like you keep a book library, or you keep a music library. Usually you keep like your music for a bunch of years. You keep your movies, like you don't get rid of them unless you have like a shift from like, I don't know, like DVD to Blu-ray, for example, or VHS to DVD or something like this. But in the case of video games, since like consoles keep like evolving all the time, then people can't have like this collection of video games like alive, like that keeps like that stays the same over the years. That's like consistent. And if you want to show your kids, like, oh, I used to play that when I was young, then you can just go on your library and click the game, and there it is. You don't have to go buy something on eBay and or buy an old system, or like hunt down like configure your emulator and all of this. It's already pre-configured and it's already running. So yeah, I have like currently over like, well, I used to have like 1,500 games installed on Lutris. But now I think it's because I've switched like machines and I removed the hard drive.
Right.
And it removed like a bunch of Steam games. So now it's like 1,350
Oh, only
something.
1,300. Oh, not that many.
Yeah. But yeah, I try to, I mean, at that point, I have like everything I spent a consequent amount of time playing in my life. I have it like right here, like playable. And if I think about a game that I used to play and it's not here, I'll just go and install it. I can't be thankful enough for the archive for that, the Internet Archive. That is very valuable resource for preservation.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you want to mention, or is that pretty much it?
I think we covered a lot of things, yeah.
We did definitely cover a lot of things. Um, if people want to go and monetarily support Lutris, you do have a couple of things for that as
That
well.
would be, yes. The easiest way is to go on the Lutris website and go onto the donate webpage, which I recently added like a new sponsor section. So if you are like a big company and you want to sponsor Lutris in some way, that's also a possibility. Just reach out to me personally, and we'll see. Like we'll arrange the details. But if you are just like an individual and you want to support Lutris, that's also great. And we have Patreon, we have PayPal, we have LiberaPay. Just keep in mind that for really small donations, PayPal has a tendency to keep like a large amount of
Yes, they
that money.
do.
So if you want to give like a small donation, it's maybe better to use Patreon than PayPal directly. So that's the cut that's maybe that I received personally is much bigger than what I would with PayPal.
Awesome. If there's nothing else to mention, I'll do my outro.
All right.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
So if you want to see the audio version of this, you can see that over on pretty much any audio platform. If you're listening to the audio, you can find the video version on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. My main channel is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. I don't know what'll be out when this comes out, so go check it out. And I've got my gaming channel, Brody on Games. Right now, I'm probably playing through Neo: The World Ends With You, and probably still Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters, so hang around for that one. I ramble a lot, so if you want to hear me ramble and yell about nonsense on the stream, feel free to pop around for that one. I'll give you the final word. What do you want to say?
Oh yeah, there's something important to mention. If you are in California in March, like you personally and like everyone in the audience, is welcome to come at the Scale Expo. So this is like the biggest event for the biggest Linux Expo. There will be like a lot of open source projects. There will be Lutris. There will be Glorious Eagle will be here. Buck from Proton DB will be hopefully here as well. And yeah, it's always like an awesome event. I encourage people to come there and come talk to us. I really enjoy like receiving people, and we talk about Lutris. I can like demo stuff. It's always a great time to meet the community. So yeah, if you're in California, in Pasadena, beginning of March, I think it's like the 9 or 10th of March, then yeah, come see us. Will be very cool.
I would definitely like to do that at some point, but it's getting
And
anywhere
also,
from
like,
Australia is expensive. It's $1,400 to get there for me.
oh yeah, if you're in Australia, yeah, I was wondering like which time zone where you were in, but if it's Australia,
Yeah.
that's a bit complicated. We've had people flying from the UK to Scale, but Australia not yet. We've almost had it at some point, someone from Australia, but never happened. So yeah, maybe, I mean,
Maybe I'll have to do it
try to
next
get like
year.
some sponsorship
Maybe.
for your travel to Scale. That would be cool.
That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so unless you have anything else to say, I guess we'll end it there.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Cool. See you guys later.